The wind never stops on the steppe. It cuts across the land like a blade, flattening grass, stripping heat from skin, erasing footprints within minutes. There are no trees to hide behind, no walls to block the cold, only sky, earth, and motion. At dawn, a Mongol camp stirs. Horses snort clouds of steam, felt walls breathe as smoke curls from a low chimney. The ground is hard, sometimes frozen solid, sometimes dust so dry it drinks moisture instantly, and in this vast, open world, one simple human need becomes a serious problem. Nature calls. There is no bathroom, no outhouse, no permanent shelter. For most modern people, this is where panic sets in, where embarrassment meets danger, where a small mistake can turn into sickness, contamination, or death. Out here, there is nowhere to hide waste, and nowhere for error to go unnoticed. But the Mongols were not careless wanderers. They were masters of movement, and they understood something few people do. On the open steppe, sanitation is not private, it is strategic. A single careless act can poison water for an entire camp. It can draw animals too close to sleeping horses. It can spread illness through families who must ride again tomorrow. In a land where camps move constantly and armies stretch for miles, waste is not just waste, it is risk. Yet the Mongols survived here for centuries. They raised children. They moved entire households in hours. They marched armies across continents without collapsing from disease. How? They didn't rely on comfort. They relied on rules. Rules about distance, rules about wind, rules about water, rules about timing, movement, and respect. They didn't fight the land. They read it. They watched how wind carried scent, how water flowed after thaw, how animals reacted to careless placement. They learned when to bury, when to disperse, and when to wait. They turned a problem most people avoid talking about into a system that protected health, dignity, and survival. This story is not about crude solutions or desperation. It's about discipline in an unforgiving world. Because on the steppe, the smallest mistake doesn't punish you later. It punishes you immediately. And the Mongols learned how to make even the most basic human need work in harmony with the land that demanded everything from them. This is how they solved the outdoor bathroom problem. Water defines life on the steppe. It is never assumed. It is searched for, guarded, and respected. A stream, a spring, a frozen river edge. These are not conveniences. They are lifelines. In a Mongol camp, everything begins with water. Where the animals drink, where food is prepared, where hands are washed, where kettles are filled at dawn and again before nightfall. One mistake here does not affect one person. It affects everyone. That is why the first rule was simple. Waste never goes near water, not uphill, not upstream, not even close. On open grassland, contamination travels fast. Meltwater runs unseen beneath snow. Summer rain spreads outward in shallow sheets. What looks dry and safe can become a silent pathway straight into a stream or well. The Mongols understood this without needing explanation. They learned it by watching animals fall sick, by seeing camps fail, by surviving what others did not. Water sources were approached with discipline. Camps were set at a careful distance. Animals were watered downstream or at separate access points. Cooking, cleaning, and drinking were kept within a protected zone. And beyond that zone, always beyond it, waste was placed where it could do no harm. Distance mattered, but direction mattered more. Waste was never left where runoff could carry it back. Never where thaw would undo months of care. Low ground was avoided if it fed into water. High ground was avoided if rain could wash downward. Placement was deliberate, chosen, remembered. Even when rivers froze, the rule did not change. Ice was not protection, it was temporary cover. Spring would come, it always did. And when it did, everything buried carelessly would return. The Mongols planned for that future. They chose spots where sunlight and wind would dry what needed drying, where earth could absorb and isolate, where nothing would leach into water used by people or animals. This was not guesswork. It was habit. Children learned these rules early, not through lectures, but through repetition. Follow the path. Walk past the clean zone. Go farther. Farther than feels comfortable, because comfort was never the goal. Survival was. In an environment without fences or walls, water became the center line. Cross it carelessly, and you endangered the camp. Respect it, and the camp endured. This is why Mongol camps could return to the same regions season after season without poisoning their own lifelines. Why herds stayed healthy. Why sickness did not spread unchecked. They understood that protecting water was not a single act. It was a constant decision. On the steppe, water remembers everything you put into it. The Mongols made sure it remembered nothing at all. On the steppe, wind is never background noise. It is a force that shapes every decision. It sculpts the land. It drives weather. It carries scent, sound, smoke, and disease. To ignore it is to invite trouble. The Mongols did not ignore it. Before a camp was set, the wind was red, not guessed, red. Smoke from a small fire told its story. Grass bending showed its habits. Clouds racing overhead confirmed what the ground already knew. Only then was placement decided, because wind determines where everything goes after you leave it behind. A sanitation followed this rule without exception. Waste was always placed downwind from the living space. Always. Not slightly off to the side, not far enough to feel safe. Fully committed to the direction the land itself declared. On open terrain, there are no walls to trap odor or insects. Wind does the moving. If waste was placed incorrectly, scent drifted back into camp. Flies followed. Animals followed. Illness followed. The mistake announced itself quickly. That is why wind became a boundary. Downwind marked the edge of the clean world. Upwind remained protected. Cooking fires, sleeping areas, food stores, and animals stayed on the safe side of that invisible line. Everyone in camp understood it. No signs were needed, no reminders spoken aloud. Even privacy relied on wind. Mongols used shallow dips, low ridges, and the leeward sides of small rises to block sight and shelter the body from cold gusts. What the land offered, they used. Nothing was forced. Season changed the wind, and rules adjusted with it. Summer breezes carried insects. Winter gales carried cold and drifting snow. Placement shifted accordingly, always maintaining distance and direction. The rule stayed the same. Only the application changed. This awareness extended to the air itself. Smoke holes were aligned. Doors faced away from prevailing winds when possible. Airflow was controlled so smoke and scent moved outward, never inward. The camp breathed with the land, not against it. To an outsider, it might look like instinct. It was not. It was learned behavior passed down through repetition and correction. Get it wrong once and you never forgot. On the steppe, the wind is always speaking. The Mongols listened. The Mongols did not build camps to last. They built camps to move. On the steppe, staying too long in one place is dangerous. Grass thins, animals weaken, waste accumulates, illness finds a foothold. The solution was not better structures or deeper pits. The solution was movement itself. Mobility became sanitation. A Mongol camp was never static. It breathed, shifted, and vanished. Gears were designed to be taken down in hours. Belongings were minimal and purposeful. Even waste management assumed departure. Nothing was meant to linger. Because when a camp moves, mistakes cannot be buried and forgotten. They must be avoided entirely. Waste was handled with the understanding that the land would soon be reused. Not immediately, but eventually. Routes overlapped. Seasonal grazing returned families to familiar ground. Careless disposal would punish future camps, maybe even their own. So waste was dispersed, not concentrated. Used areas were rotated. Spots were chosen with departure in mind. What was placed on the land had to be safe enough to leave behind without consequence. This changed everything. There were no permanent latrines to fill and overflow, no fixed sites to become foul. Instead, the camp expanded and contracted like a living organism, shedding risk as it moved forward. Even time was part of the system. Short stays meant less buildup. Long stays demanded stricter discipline. The longer the camp remained, the farther waste zones moved outward. Distance grew with time. Always away from water, always downwind. Children learned this rhythm early. They knew that a camp was temporary by design, clean enough to abandon without regret, clean enough to return to someday. This mobility also protected dignity. No place became marked or shamed. No area became avoided because of neglect. When the camp moved, the land was left quiet again. Wind erased signs, grass recovered, snow sealed what remained. To modernize, this looks like simplicity. It is not. It is logistics without infrastructure, sanitation without permanence, discipline without enforcement. The Mongols did not need walls or systems to stay clean. They used movement itself as their greatest tool. On the steppe, the cleanest camp is the one that knows when to leave. Winter on the steppe changes every rule. The earth hardens. Soil locks tight. What could be dug in summer becomes unbreakable. Wind sharpens. Snow blinds distance. And exposure turns small errands into real danger. In these conditions, digging is not always possible, and walking far from shelter is not always safe. The Mongols prepared for this. When the ground froze solid, waste management shifted from digging to containment, not permanently, not carelessly, temporarily with intention. The goal was never convenience, it was control. During storms or extreme cold, venturing far from the gear could cost fingers or lives, so short-term solutions were used close to shelter, always contained, always covered, always removed as soon as conditions allowed. Snow became an ally. Fresh snow was clean and plentiful. It absorbed moisture quickly and froze solid within minutes. Waste could be covered immediately, sealed by cold and wind, locked away until it could be safely dealt with later. Cold itself became a tool. Freezing slowed decay. It reduced odor. It limited the spread of bacteria and insects. What would be dangerous in warm weather became manageable in winter. Not harmless, manageable. The distinction mattered. Ash from the fire played a critical role. Sprinkled over waste, it dried surfaces, neutralized smell, and created a barrier against animals. Combined with snow and cold, it formed a simple but effective system that protected the camp without contaminating the land. Timing was everything. These methods were never meant to last. As soon as weather cleared, waste was moved farther away. Buried where possible. Dispersed where burial was impossible. Winter solutions were bridges, not destinations. The Mongols understood that frozen ground did not erase responsibility. It only delayed it. They planned for thaw even while surrounded by ice. They chose locations where meltwater would not run back toward camp or water sources. They avoided low spots that would flood in spring. Every winter, decision considered what would happen months later. This awareness kept camps healthy through long, isolated seasons. It prevented hidden dangers from emerging when the snow finally retreated. Winter did not break their systems, it refined them. On the steppe, survival meant adapting without forgetting. Even when the ground turned to iron, the rules still held. On the steppe, anything that cannot move becomes a liability. Weight slows travel. Bulk wastes energy. Complexity fails in the cold. Mongol tools were shaped by this reality, especially when it came to sanitation. Nothing was built to last forever. Everything was built to work now and then disappear. The Mongols did not carry specialized equipment for waste. They adapted what they already had. Felt, hide, wood, ash, earth, snow. Each material served more than one purpose, and every object earned its place by being useful in multiple ways. Felt, the same material that insulated the gear, provided warmth, privacy, and containment. Thick, dense, and breathable, it resisted moisture and cold. Hide offered flexibility and strength. It did not crack in freezing weather and could be cleaned, dried, and reused without damage. Bark and wood were light, easy to shape, and readily replaced when camps moved. Ash was always close at hand. Fire was central to Mongol life, and ash was never treated as waste. It dried surfaces, absorbed moisture, and neutralized odor. A small amount went a long way. Sprinkled carefully, it turned a problem into something manageable and safe. Earth completed the system. Dry soil, sand, or fine dust sealed and isolated. In winter, snow replaced soil. In summer, wind and sun finished the work. Nothing relied on water alone because water was too valuable to waste. Cleaning followed the same logic. Water was used sparingly. Snow became a cleanser when available. Cold, clean, and abundant, it removed residue without draining supplies needed for drinking or cooking. In dry conditions, wiping with grass or cloth, followed by ash, kept hygiene without excess. Every tool was portable, every solution temporary by design. This mattered because sanitation could never slow departure. If the herd needed to move, if weather changed, if danger approached, nothing was left behind that required dismantling or cleanup beyond what the land itself would finish. These were not crude improvisations. They were refined responses to a life in motion. Each method had been tested through seasons of failure and survival. Anything that caused sickness, delay, or contamination was abandoned quickly. Only what worked remained. To an outsider, the absence of permanent structures might look like a lack. In truth, it was freedom. Freedom from buildup. Freedom from dependency. Freedom to leave without consequence. The Mongols did not solve sanitation by adding more objects. They solved it by choosing the right ones. Materials that could travel. Methods that could adapt. Systems that vanished when no longer needed. On the steppe, the best tool is the one that leaves no trace. The steppe offers no hiding places, no alleys, no corners, no trees to step behind. And yet, privacy mattered. Dignity mattered. Even in a world built on openness and movement, the Mongols maintained clear boundaries around the most personal acts of daily life. They did not rely on structures, they relied on rules. Privacy was created through distance, timing, and awareness. Not secrecy. Everyone understood where to go and when. Paths were followed without question. Eyes were turned away without being asked. Respect was assumed because survival depended on cooperation. Position did most of the work. Small rises in the land, shallow dips, the leeward side of a low ridge, even a slight change in elevation could break line of sight on flat ground. What the land offered, they used. Timing mattered just as much. Early morning, late evening. Moments when activity slowed and movement was predictable. Privacy came from rhythm, not isolation. Gender roles shaped these practices, but they were guided by respect rather than restriction. Men and women observed different routines, different distances, different expectations. These were not arbitrary customs. They reduced risk. They prevented disruption. They preserved order within the camp. During storms or darkness, when distance became dangerous, rules adapted. Temporary solutions were used closer to shelter, always contained, always discreet, always removed when conditions improved. Privacy did not disappear in hardship. It adjusted. Children learned these boundaries early. They knew which areas were not to be crossed casually, which directions were off limits at certain times. No one needed explanations. The behavior itself taught the rule. This system reduced embarrassment, conflict, and confusion. No one was forced into exposure. No one had to choose between dignity and safety. The rules made space for both. In modern thinking, privacy is often tied to buildings. Doors, locks, walls. The Mongols proved otherwise. Privacy is a social agreement enforced through shared understanding. It is a form of discipline, not architecture. Even the gear reflected this mindset. Interior order was maintained carefully. Clean space remained clean. What did not belong inside stayed outside. The shelter itself represented balance. To disturb that balance unnecessarily was unthinkable. Privacy was not about hiding from one another. It was about honoring shared boundaries, about moving through daily life without friction, about allowing everyone to function without shame or risk. On the steppe, nothing blocks the view for long. Wind shifts, light changes, people move. And yet, through habit and respect, privacy existed. Not because the land provided it, because the people did. On the steppe, humans were never alone. Horses, dogs, livestock, birds, and scavengers moved through the same space. This made sanitation more than a human concern. It was an animal problem, and animal problems became human problems quickly. The Mongols understood this connection clearly. Waste attracts attention. Dogs investigate. Birds circle. In warmer seasons, insects follow. And where animals gather, disease has a way of spreading. A careless placement could turn a clean camp into a problem zone within days. That is why sanitation zones were never placed near horses. Horses were life. Transport, food security, warfare, survival. Their grazing areas, watering spots, and resting lines were kept separate from anything that could draw scavengers or contamination. Waste areas sat beyond these invisible boundaries, far enough that animals had no reason to wander toward them. Camp dogs were watched carefully. If they began frequenting certain spots, those areas were abandoned or moved farther away. Behavior was a signal. The Mongols paid attention. Food preparation followed the same logic. Meat drying racks, cooking fires, storage areas, all were placed upwind and uphill from waste. Clean zones stayed clean because nothing tempting crossed into them. This separation created what could be called an invisible fence, not made of wood or rope, but of habit and awareness. Everyone knew which areas were safe and which were not. Animals learned quickly too. Disease was seen as imbalance, not bad luck. If sickness appeared, it meant something had gone wrong. A rule had been ignored. A boundary crossed. Sanitation was always one of the first things examined. This vigilance mattered even more in large camps or during extended stays. The more animals present, the greater the risk. So discipline increased with scale. Waste zones moved farther out. Rotation happened more frequently. Nothing was allowed to accumulate long enough to become attractive. Even scavengers played a role. Birds helped disperse small traces. Wind dried what remained. Sun sterilized surfaces. When systems were followed, nature itself assisted in cleanup. When they were not, nature punished the mistake. The Mongols did not attempt to control animals completely. They guided behavior instead. By placing waste where it offered no reward, animals stayed away. The camp remained calm. Order held. On the steppe, health is not enforced with medicine. It is enforced with placement. And the line between clean and dangerous is one you learn to see long before it becomes visible. A small family camp can survive a mistake. An army cannot. When thousands of people move together, the margin for error disappears. Disease spreads faster than any enemy. Contaminated water can cripple a force before the first arrow is loosed. The Mongols understood this, and they treated sanitation as a matter of command, not convenience. An army on the move followed the same rules as a family camp, but with sharper discipline. Water came first. Drinking sources were identified and protected immediately. No waste upstream, no waste nearby. Guards were posted not just for defense, but for enforcement. A single violation could endanger the entire force. Wind was read constantly. Camps were aligned to prevailing patterns. Waste zones were placed far downwind, beyond the reach of cooking fires, animals, and sleeping lines. In large formations, multiple zones were established and rotated to prevent buildup. Nothing was left to chance. Movement simplified sanitation at scale. Armies did not linger unless forced. Camps were temporary by design. What could not be safely managed was avoided altogether. The longer the stay, the stricter the rules became. Hierarchy mattered. Orders were clear. Responsibilities assigned. Everyone knew where to go and where not to. Confusion breeds mistakes, and mistakes breed illness. Clarity kept people alive. Horses were again the priority. Thousands of mounts meant thousands of vulnerable bodies. Waste near horse lines was unthinkable. Grazing and watering areas were guarded fiercely. The army moved only as fast as its animals could remain healthy. Winter added another layer of risk. Frozen ground limited options. Storms shortened exposure time. Temporary containment was used when necessary, but removal followed as soon as conditions allowed. Even at scale, nothing permanent was tolerated. What made this possible was culture. Soldiers were raised within the same rules they followed on campaign. These practices were not new. They were familiar, enforced not by fear, but by understanding. This discipline allowed Mongol forces to move farther, faster, and longer than their opponents. While others weakened from disease, Mongol armies remained functional. Clean camps meant strong bodies. Strong bodies meant victory. Sanitation never appears in battle stories. It rarely earns praise. But on the steppe, it decided outcomes as surely as strategy or skill. An army that cannot manage its waste cannot manage war. The Mongols knew this, and they built their power on rules most people never see. The Mongols did not solve sanitation with structures or technology. They solved it with awareness. They watched wind, protected water, moved before problems grew, and left the land clean enough to return. Every rule served survival, not comfort. That same discipline shaped every part of steppe life. How camps moved, how animals stayed healthy, how winter was endured when trees were rare and fuel scarce. It is the same logic behind how Mongolian herders survived steppe winters without firewood. Nothing was wasted, nothing was careless.